Good afternoon, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, from those joining from our other time zones. This is a repeat of our session, which we had this morning of the GECKO final conference. But I would like to start by welcoming you on behalf of the GECKO consortium to this first day of the final conference. My name is Yannick Busse from UITP, which is the International Association of Public Transport. I'm also the coordinator of this project. And after 33 months, the GECKO project is coming to an end with this final conference where we will be presenting to you our final results. On our program for today, on this first day, we will have firstly, a look at the surrounding context of around the project itself. What are some of the issues that are going on in the background of this project and how we aim to feed into those from the project itself. Then we'll have a short overview of the project itself with also looking at some of the results coming out. And then we'll be able to go a little bit deeper into the business models, technologies, services, and then also the corresponding and regulatory responses, the governance frameworks, which are also matching these for new mobility solutions. Join us also tomorrow for the final conference program, where we'll be able to find out about the regulatory supportive tool coming from the project. What are also the recommendations for policymakers? And we'll also have a look at how does regulation of new mobility solutions fit within the Sustainable Urban Mobility Planning Framework. So that's for our program. We'll also, at the end of each of these sessions, we'll have time for questions and answers. We'll have this opportunity. If you have questions during the presentations at any time, feel free to put these into the chat box of this Microsoft Teams meeting and conference, and we will pick up on these, and then we'll be able to come to these questions during the question and answer at the end of the session. So at any time, feel free to put the questions into the chat. I think most of us are kind of aware of how these work now, these type of events, but just for information, here are the rules anyway. So you have the mute and unmute button. Attendees, also our speakers, please stay muted until it's your turn to speak. If you're an attendee and you don't have the right to speak, then please just put inside the chat also the request if you would like to open your microphone, and then we can also do this. So that is it for the housekeeping for today. Without further ado, then I would like to hand over to my colleague, Emmanuel Domecq, for the first presentation. Emmanuel is manager of the UITP Organizing Authorities Committee, the Informal Transport Working Group, and he's also head of the Mobility Governance Unit within UITP. He's been working most of his career in the public transport sector, first as a transport advisor in the city of Paris, then on metro projects at RATP in Paris also, and then also with the Paris Region Authority also on transport-related projects. So, Emmanuel, I would hand over to you for our first presentation.
Thank you, Yannick. So can you hear me well, and is the PowerPoint visible?
Yes, we can see you and we can hear you.
Perfect. Thank you, Yannick. So dear GECKO consortium members, dear participants, and Yannick, let me start by thanking and congratulating the team involved in GECKO for organizing this conference, and of course for the great and significant job that has been done over the past 33 months, which is a quite long period. A lot of things have been done. Well done also for organizing this final conference. I'd like especially to thank you, Yannick, because you've been the cornerstone in this project, and you have put so much energy and talent to make GECKO be a success. So thanks a lot for that. I'm pleased to say a few words today about the context in which GECKO fits. And this presentation will cover actually two aspects. One will be about presenting some trends that have been recently observed on our public transport networks, and also that relates to mobility patterns. That will be quite generic. And second, I'm happy to present to today's audience how UITP has been addressing the topic of regulation and governance of new mobility solutions, and how GECKO fits in this framework. So let's get started, and let's start with sharing some trends that have been observed about mobility, and also the let's say subsequent needs that can be observed today. So generic elements. First, let's say that traditional asset-heavy and high-capacity transport systems have been challenged, and that has already taken place before COVID, by the development of new services and new mobility practices. A mix of new technology and also individual transport modes have led to the development of disruptive transport and mobility solutions. Second, now talking about the pandemic and its aftermaths, we can notice that there's a lower level of patronage public transport. We can also notice some undesired increase in car usage and more widely reconfigurated mobility patterns. Well, basically the pandemic and some of its aftermaths have raised the awareness of how important today uncertainty is for our work on a day-to-day basis, whether operators or on the long term, whether planners. What is the new normal seems to be a widely shared but still open question. Third, in an effort to face the pandemic, the stakeholders of the public transport sector, authorities, regulators, operators, etc., what can be noticed is that they all have been acting agilely and innovatively to respond to the crisis. And part of the response lies in the role that was provided by new mobility solutions, new mobility services. And that's fully in line with GECKO. Fourth, beyond the crisis, beyond the pandemic response, firefighting actions, public transport stakeholders are, of course, looking at the medium long term to build back better, right? In other words, all these stakeholders are trying to imagine new possible futures. This would translate into a variety of scenarios for tomorrow. And this exercise has become quite commonplace. And it's a new way of looking at the future and projecting ourselves in the future. And this is where I'd like to come, because this is one element which is quite important. This is where a change of mindset regarding new mobility solutions is currently taking place among stakeholders of the industry, but also probably also among the users. In particular, the role to be played by new mobility solutions as a complement to what could be qualified as mass public transport, and as a solution to build back better, is a key question for the industry today. So that was the vision, which is now being developing, which is becoming mainstream to a certain extent. To implement this vision, governance-related tools need to be made available now to regulators, operators, so that they can bring some sort of order in all the transport supply and in all the supply of those new mobility services. Therefore, practical support is more than welcome to regulators, authorities, operators to develop, regulate, and integrate those new solutions, those new services as part of the mobility system. And this covers, of course, all this refers, and we're going to discuss this certainly, to new forms of cooperation, co-construction, ecosystemic work, etc., etc. And of course, GECKO brings valuable light to that topic. Talking of the new normal projects us in a variety of possible futures, as mentioned. However, all of them require to face a couple of dominating challenges. One challenge, of course, is relates to equity and inclusiveness, and there's another one who has recently been stressed by the ICCP report, which is, of course, to mitigate and get prepared to global warming and climate disruptions. This is the, let's say, policy or political dimension I'd like to stress, to mention. And of course, again, which refers to the recent conclusions and warnings from the ICCP report. What are the strategies and visions? What are the tools and the role to be tools used to regulate these new services, and the role to be played, to be given to these new services? What are the position of authorities and regulator? I think we can agree that there's strong need to support this combat against climate change. And this slide presents several international and EU-wide commitments that would directly refer to this. That's what I wanted to share with you to start with about trends and also political objectives. Let's move on now to something that's focused now on the key substance, if I may say, of GECKO, and let's share how has UITP been contributing to reflections that relate both to regulation governance and to new mobility solutions. So this slide refers to the regulation and governance aspect of the topics we're dealing today, and we all know that those are key enabler that will bring any kind of improvements to the transport sector. However, we are also aware that regulation and governance can be hidden. We're not necessarily in the main light. We tend to focus on tech-based solutions, which of course are the end of the process and that are key and necessary. Bringing the topics of regulation and governance out of the shade has been a permanent effort undertaken by UITP, and I know that other partners today taking part in this call have also played a role to support this topic. So in more detail, the slide presents a series of reports issued by UITP and also EU-funded projects to which UITP brings and is bringing its contributions. These are about the relevance of sustainable development goals to public transport and also transport strategies and all what goes along with the reporting. This also refers to the management of change, the governance to deal with disruptive mobility solutions, the role of data in regulation and governance, as well as data-related research, and of course, very important SUMPs and also innovative street designs, which are key topic which are being dealt with, particularly this EU-funded MORE project. Links will be made available in this PowerPoint presentation. Moreover, the role to be played by new mobility solutions has also been at the core of the UITP preoccupations. Mass is a major topic, of course, for UITP. More recently, UITP has looked at how cities can adapt their urban space to new mobility solutions. Our UITP Asian office is also looking at on-demand mobility of people and goods, and not to mention the involvement of UITP in other EU-funded projects such as Momentum, which deals with transport modeling and planning to support tools to capture the impact, to estimate the impact of the new mobility solutions on urban mobility ecosystems. Again, these references will be made available. By producing this knowledge on these various topics, UITP aims, of course, at contributing to improve the understanding and to raise the awareness of a key role that is to be played by regulation and new mobility services. In particular, this contributes to some strategic topics that have been identified by UITP and that are used to frame what we call at UITP our integrated work program. Among them, there's first of all to create a more resilient transport system by integrating those new mobility solutions in case of disruptions of mass transit, decarbonize our mobility by bringing some clean solutions, advanced systems and service for better urban mobility, better serve, for instance, feeder modes, and redefine our public transport system and our urban environment. And I'll finish on that. UITP promotes, to be quick and short, the overarching goal of what we call mobility for life, with the key aim of promoting a car-light city, lively streets as well, and the freshly unveiled results from GECKO relating to, again, regulation and mobility services will definitely strengthen even more all this work, which will carry on in the coming months and years as part of GECKO, but also as part of other projects, as you can see from this arrow. and hopefully all this will strengthen even more, let's say, all the knowledge, best practice to bring value to the sector. That's it on my side. Thanks for listening, and in the Q&A session, I'll be happy to answer questions if you have some. Thanks everyone.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. Okay, then we'll move swiftly on to the next presentation, which will be given by myself. So I will talk to you about some more about the project itself, and also briefly some of the results and what we have been doing in this project. So whenever we look at the GECKO project, we basically also want to look at how can we support authorities with a better regulation and governance framework to meet their sustainable urban mobility goals. And this is something that's a key aspect and a key cornerstone of this project that we have been focusing on. The project itself has had 6 strategic objectives. So in the first stage, what we were doing is look at what are the technology, services, business models, and trends taking place within new mobility solutions at the moment, taking place within urban areas, within society at the moment, and then we tried to map these out. Then we also looked at what are the corresponding regulatory responses and governance models also. And this is something we have also been working on to map these also. And this is what we'll also be looking into further today into our presentations. And then we looked at what are the characteristics and requirements of these regulations and governance models also. And then an important part of the work that we had was what are the stakeholders, and we engaged with a large number of stakeholders. And this was also a key partner that we worked with throughout this project to get impact and feedback from stakeholders also. Then we were able to formulate a number of recommendations for policymakers. And then finally, we were able to disseminate these findings and tools through our channels in the project, such as our final conference here today. Here is the methodology. Basically, we had these 3 dimensions. So I was saying first, the picture of what is the state of play, the technology, services, business models, the regulations that are currently at the moment in urban areas, and then what are we're able to take this to our stakeholders also and discuss this during workshops. We conducted surveys, interviews, focus groups, and webinars. And this has all been feeding into the outputs of the project, which has been our knowledge bank, compliance map, policy recommendations, and also a roadmap for regulation also. So when starting then, first we looked at what are these innovations that we'd like to study in the project, and we came up with a number of categories, basically a higher level categories. So connected, cooperative, and automated mobility, infrastructure, network, and traffic management, shared on-demand mobility, and mobility as a service and mobility as a service platforms. Then we're also able to look at what are the corresponding regulations and governance models, and we have collected these in a database, which you'll also be able to find on our GECKO website. And this has also been shaped now into what we call our compliance map, and the link is also available on the website. And so we have there collected 228 regulations and analyzed this from not just from Europe, but across the world also, including Canada, US, China, India, Australia, Saudi Arabia, Brasilia, and we can go on. A number of countries have been collected in this map here. An important part, what we did also then is to go to stakeholders to discuss these regulations and be able to come out with recommendations, guidelines, which we'll be presenting with you through this final conference. And we had a database of 187 stakeholders that we were working with, and these were divided into 3 distinct categories. So from the public sector, from the private sector, but also other stakeholders from academia, from NGOs, other stakeholders which have also been taking part and working together with us on this project. We've had also 3 in-depth workshops where we have discussed various topics and collected feedback and inputs. We also offered 3 webinars on various topics which are available on the GECKO website at the moment. And we have also been recording podcasts, which are the first of 2 the first of these four, two of them are available on the GECKO website at the moment also, in our resources section. We have also formulated a number of recommendations for policymakers. Tomorrow we'll be going into more detail of this, but here you can already see a brief overview of this. So we have recommendations on the regulatory and governance approaches, on the cooperation between public and private parties, on services, business models for new mobility services, and also two other very important aspects which we found, which was data and sustainability also. I will go into more detail on this in a presentation tomorrow. Then we have also been able to have a wide range of results, which you can find on the website, which is page 2020-GECKO.eu, and then there you'll find a large number of publications and reports which are available right now on the website. Then I would also really like to thank our project consortium. You can see here on the slides the wide variety of partners which took part in this project. So thank you very much to their dedication, their hard work in their research, and also everything that they have done and contributed to this project. And finally, also another thank you to our stakeholders which have taken part in the project. And without our stakeholder involvement, really, we would not have been able to formulate the recommendation and do the work that we have done in this project so far. So we have actually collected some short messages from our stakeholders about what they have learned from the GECKO project, which we could play for you in a video right now.
I found the GECKO project really valuable for learning about the industry perspective and the challenges the industry and cities and user groups like walkers face to integrate these new modes into our city streets and public spaces.
The most valuable lesson I learned from my participation as a GECKO stakeholder was that sometimes we are working in silos, and I discovered that a lot of us have the same problem, and that we not only need intermodality for the passenger, but also on the supply side, and we need intermodality collaboration between service providers and authorities.
The most valuable lesson that I've learned through being a stakeholder in the GECKO project is understanding the barriers that are faced by mobility providers in the private sector when it comes to legislation from territory to territory, and being more open-minded towards that.
We learned that the new mobility options can be a kind of business, that there are a lot of hopes, there are promises, sometimes false promises, and of course there's also some potential. And we learned that it's necessary to have some regulations. We have to see that developments can be quite dynamic, so we have to adapt to these developments. Not only technical developments, but also societal developments. And yeah, and we learned that we're not alone, that municipalities, cities face similar problems.
Standards really can play a significant role in developing regulations, although we still have a ways to go to identify specific standards for several of the new mobility services, like mobility as a service. And the other is that regulations and guidelines that we're developing for new mobility services really should reflect the goals and objectives of the location where the regulations are being developed.
Okay, so thank you again to our stakeholders and all of our partners. That's it at the moment for this presentation. so we can conclude this, and then we'll go on actually to our next speaker. So I'd like to hand over now at the moment to Jiang Kao, who will be presenting next for us. Jiang, are you with us?
Yeah. Okay, so I just share my screen now.
Yes, so Jiang is a research fellow in business model innovation at the University College London. He received his doctoral degree from the Warwick Business School at the University of Warwick, and he's mainly focusing on developing overarching strategies in high-tech industry, and he has also been consulted by several Fortune 500 companies and UK startups. Jiang, we can see your presentation and we can see you also, so please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Yannick, for the warm introduction, and thank you for everyone coming for this session. So today I will discuss the topic of shaping the future mobility with business model innovation, regulatory support, and challenges. And in today's presentation, there are mainly three parts. In the first part, I will discuss the new mobility services and technologies and business model that we have reviewed throughout this project. In the second part, I will discuss the regulatory support that needed for sustainable business model innovation transition and the challenges that we might encounter in the future. In the third part, I will briefly discuss how the COVID-19 impacts the sustainable business model innovation. Yeah, so in the GECKO project, we have reviewed many different new mobility services and technologies, and we categorize all these innovation into 4 categories. In the first categories is the connected, cooperative, and automated mobilities, which includes things like autonomous vehicles, drone deliveries, and urban air mobilities. The second category is infrastructure, network, and traffic management. And in this category, we focus on the application of big data in traffic management and Hyperloop. The third category is mass and mass platforms. And the final category is shared on-demand mobility, which we include things like ride-hailing, bike-sharing, and cross-shipping as well. So yeah, during the project, we are not only review this new mobility service and technology, we also investigate their current market maturity, the market positioning, and their future development. In the meantime, we also review this innovation based on 5 different criteria, including technological, operational, social, business, and security, including cybersecurity, safety, etc. So a lot of factors are reviewed in order to know how the future mobility will be shaping. So you can find more details on deliverable 1.1 and 1.4, which already be shown on the GECKO website. The finding of this review become the basis for our stakeholder workshop, which you attended. And in addition to this, we also investigate the business models in different innovation categories. Here, just an example of in the CCN categories, we use the business model canvas approach to investigate 9 elements, from value proposition, customer relationship, channels, to the cost structure, revenue. So 9 elements are investigated. And the finding, we also, in order to deepen the finding, we also interview with different stakeholders to look at how their firms propose, create, deliver, and finally capture value from their new innovation and from their business models. And all this finding was used in the workshop to investigate the sustainable business model innovation and how funds can change to the sustainable one. And also in the workshop, we investigate what kind of regulatory support and the challenges are essential for these firms. Here's our finding. So there are 6 different regulatory support that private sector expect in the future, but also in each support, we also identify some challenges. So the first one is the transparent and well-established data policies. So these firms expect that in the future, more concrete, more established data policy is needed in order to have the standard data API to follow and to integrate their solution with different partners. However, the challenge is that these standards and APIs are always difficult to be consistent, especially given the nature of data variety and also in different areas. So in different cities, they may have different standards. And if we talk about the whole Europe, the inconsistency become wider. So yeah, this is a challenge that need to be solved. And the second support is the public education. So these firms expect that for the public sector, if they can educate and persuade end user to adopt a new mobility service and technologies for environmental reason, this will benefit for their service promotion. However, from the end user perspective, it will be difficult to be persuaded just by the environmental reason. So there is also need to find some economic benefits to educate the end user about the benefits of these sustainable solutions. The third one is the stronger public-private partnership model. So we all know that public and private partnership is quite important in order to make all these new mobility solutions feasible and make their business model work. However, the city always need to make sure that this kind of collaboration is really profitable in the long run and it's sustainable, not only benefit to the private sector itself, but also benefit the public sector. And the more important is the dialogue between public and private sector is not always region specific. Sorry, not always general. It's quite region specific. So we need to adopt a city-to-city approach. Different area might have a different partnership model considering the last mile and the first mile solution and the general solution. And the fourth support is a new urban space allocation. Space like biking lane, like more work site, and parking space are quite important for shared mobility. And yeah, all the firms say in order to promote and make them to develop and expand market, they need more support for urban space allocation. However, why should city provide space for business that can make money? And what's the main benefit for city to do so, to invest money to reallocate spaces? So the private sector always need to prove the benefit for the municipalities, which is also very challenging for them, especially for the startups. And the fifth is the support for subsidies for peripheral transportation like first mile and last mile transportation is also a critical support for them. So the challenge is the new players, just like I said, the entrepreneurs, innovators, or just new startups. they need to prove the contribution to the city. They can adjust, for example, the first mile and last mile goals, and they can also benefit some vulnerable groups in order to receive the support and the positive subsidies. Finally, the final support is the assessment of the environmental footprint. So this one is also challenging one because it will need to charge the environmental impact to the end users, and the end user usually this will discourage them to adopt these new mobility solutions. And in addition, the standard for environmental footprint across different cities, different areas might be also a problem to define what kind of standard. So it will be difficult to use a universal standard across cities and the rural area. It needs to be tailored. So this is another challenges for in the future. And finally, we also investigate how COVID-19 influences sustainable business model innovation. And we find that this pandemic is actually a double-edged sword for sustainability. And given the trend of more home-based living and the working environment, so more people start working from home, and in the future, some people prefer to move to rural area and somewhere far from the center. So a lot of people might drive car. So on the one hand, this COVID-19 pandemic make people change their habit, and things like moving goods and service without human interaction become a preferable option for them. However, on the other hand, this COVID-19 will unintendedly to potentially increase the car ownership in the future. So people might expect that the development of connected and cooperative automated mobility like drone delivery or autonomous vehicle might develop in a better direction. However, this will contradict to the sustainable goal, which we try to reduce the car ownership. So COVID-19 is have positive impact and negative impact. It's really increase the complexity for policymaker to make a better decision, and also increase the complexity of decision making of firms because they often need to follow what the policy says. Yeah, so this is my presentation for today's session. Thank you for your listening. If you have any questions, feel free to text in the chat box, and we will address them in the later session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ping-Jiang. That's a very good reminder. So if you do have any questions, feel free to already put them into the chat box of this Microsoft Teams, and we'll be coming to this at the end of our presentations for today. So thank you very much again, Ping-Jiang, and then we'll move on to our next presentation along the line. So that's with Ignat Kulkov. Ignat is a doctoral student at the Laboratory of Industrial Management at Åbo Academy University in Finland. And his research interests center around technologies such as virtual and augmented reality, artificial intelligence, blockchain, and other mature technologies. And he's currently researching the role of new technologies in transport and healthcare transformation. Ignat, I will put your presentation also on the screen. You should be able to see this now.
Absolutely, thank you.
Ignat, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Yannick. Dear partners and stakeholders, my name is Ignat. I am from Åbo Academy University, Finland. We are responsible for Work Package 2. And my presentation today is regulatory and governance frameworks for mobility innovations. Yannick. My presentation consists on several parts. First, I will talk about variables influencing governance of mobility innovations, how we searched and analyzed our data for the project. Second, what kind of governance models and regulatory responses we found and offer as results. I will continue then with cooperation among private and public actors. And at the end, some information about the role of COVID-19 for transport innovations. So what are the factors that influence governance of mobility innovations? We tried to use a holistic approach in gathering and analyzing data for the project. We analyzed different participants of the business ecosystem from the point of view of their cooperation and competition, how they complement each other, and what kind of lock-ins are available. Quite sensitive question was related to data management and the use of this data. We later found that data management may be among the keys to success for new mobility governance and project implementation. We analyzed current political and economic aspects that are already available on the market worldwide. Social aspects were important for private and public organizations and made sense on choosing and developing new mobility projects. And also environmental aspects and public safety were analyzed to make a framework more clear. Okay. We found that different mobility innovations or groups of innovations need different approaches in governance. Successful project implementation and development depend on several aspects. We formed the main required capabilities for governing disruptive mobility projects. Here is the list on the side, on the left side. A few words about governance models and regulatory responses. Yannick? Not all governance tools are new, but some are still crucial and require updates to incorporate mobility innovations. As regards the mobility sector specifically, policymakers at the European Union level play a key role regarding the question of safety, environment, funding, social protection, standardization, and competition. Certain areas related to mobility require regulation at the European Union level rather than following the subsidiarity principle and having decisions taken at national or local level. This includes issues that are not directly related to any specific of mobility innovation or require harmonization at higher than national level. For example, when it concerns supranational infrastructure. We can talk about three groups that address governance models. First of all, about definitions of norms and standards, then experimentation of a strategy or solution that is provided, and things that are related to technology itself. Cooperation between public and private partners was a hot topic of our work package. The entrance of new mobility players challenges the way public authorities organize the relationship with service providers, namely the traditional contractual framework. Contracts based on detailed specifications coupled with competition can constitute a framework that prevents public transport services to evolve as well. Therefore, instruments such as Memorandum of Understanding that evolve over time can be preferred. However, when there is a greater clarity on the service to be provided, then a more solid contract could be used. We have studied the state of cooperation between public and private parties in the governance of mobility and also how these parties perceive its importance. We received 45 responses from stakeholders. 1/3 of public and private companies sign contracts that define collaboration with each other. Near half of companies need more clear plans how to collaborate with each other. And the majority of respondents consider cooperation as very important for the future development. After the start of the project, COVID-19 pandemic has happened, and it also influenced mobility innovations, project implementation, and their governance. We found that COVID-19 has short-term and long-term impacts on the governance of disruptive mobility innovations. Different governance principles and models reflect pandemic on their own way. For example, the suspension of pilot projects for the introduction of new types of mobility is worth noting as short-term constraints, while long-term problems may arise with the reduction of R&D projects in general due to uncertainty about the need in a post-pandemic world. By education, we mean informing passengers about transport safety and the possibility of returning to shared mobility. Lack of proper education in the future can affect the growth of personal transport use and increase emissions. Temporary reformatting of urban infrastructure could lead to more global changes in urban infrastructure in favor of new type of mobility. Well-known social distancing and redistribution of urban space happen in short-term. Sustainable recovery plans, acceleration of sustainable mobility, and urban space allocation may happen in long term. Transport infrastructure can be easily redistributed in favor of current benefits, and international public-private cooperation could appear in long term. Thank you for listening. If you have further any questions, please contact us and we will try to collaborate and explain our results better for you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ignat. So that concludes our presentations, our first set of presentations, which are today. Now we have some time for questions and answers. Again, please feel free to put already your questions into the chat, and we'll be coming to these now in our Q&A session. So I'd like to invite back our speakers with Emmanuel, Ping Jiang, and Ignat to the stage. And I'd also like to introduce our moderator for the question and answer session here now. So Lydia Signor is manager of the Combined Mobility Committee in UITP within the Mobility Governance Unit. She holds a master's degree from École de Pont in France in urban mobility planning and design. And she has specialized in international cooperation in developing countries and also in transport. And after that, she was also part of the Mobility as a Service Alliance at Ertico ITS Europe. So Lydia, over to you for our Q&A.
Thanks. Thanks, Yannick. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Very good. Well, thank you very much. And thanks to all the speakers for the very informative and short presentations, which is a challenge. So thank you all also for that. So as UITP expert working on multimodality, combined mobility, I'm of course very happy to be here, to be involved in this final online conference with you all. That is inspiring me, I have to say, and I'm also learning a lot. So, and I'm also sure that the audience over there, so you the speakers, you are also learning something, or you might be inspired, or perhaps you don't agree on something. So please don't be shy, use the chat. It's that button over there that you can see. Just click on it and use it to, of course, ask questions. That's why we are in this Q&A session. But also comment, feed your experience. We know that we have this afternoon session also to cover people that are in the US, in Americas, in other geographies. So there might be differences because this is a European project. So very international, of course, but we may like to hear also your voice. So try to open up the micro later on, perhaps, to see if the chat becomes too hot. So to give you a little bit the possibility to interact. So, but so far, let's start with a question. And actually, I have a few questions for all of you, the speakers. My question for you, but also for the audience that perhaps they just connected, so would be what, if you have to pick up three main takeaways from the project, something that people should take with them from the GECKO project, what will they be? And let me call you one by one and start with Emmanuel to have a broad view on that. So please, Emmanuel, you're the first.
Thanks, Lydia. It's a very rich project, lots of things, so it's difficult. But three key takeaway for me would be, first of all, referring to one of the slides that was presented, moving from a, let's say, restrictive approach to a more, let's say, open approach in our cities related to these new mobility services. I think this is quite important, and this refers, of course, to the vision we have of the role to be played by those services, and this is quite political. So this is, I think, one key element. The second element would refer to tools, to cooperation models. And what is interesting is we have a variety of cooperation models there. And also, I think this is probably one conclusion that we could draw from this project, is that there could be different steps regarding the cooperation model, cooperative model between all the stakeholders. And the third one, sorry, would probably be about the acceptable conditions by which, or according to which, those services could simply be developed in a city. This is again quite political, and I would refer to three dimensions, and the three dimensions which are the one of sustainable development, from an economic point of view, of course, from an equity point of view, and also from an environmental and climate point of view. So those would be my three key takeaway. And I'm sorry, I'll just add one element, which is, I think, a key background element would refer to how do we create actually this dialogue, this cooperation between the private and the public sector. And maybe we'll come back to that, but there could probably be also some interesting examples, case studies of mixed type of structures, both half public, half private, that could be some sort of intermediate structures that could be used to regulate, organize, structure, etc. the services. That's it on my side. Thanks.
Thank you. Very interesting. So 4 takeaways for Emmanuel. Okay. Let's see with Yannick. What would you say? What are the 3 or perhaps 4 key takeaways from you?
Sure. I would look at a number of tools and approaches which we have been looking into in this project, and see basically how I find also then the next step is how then the authorities, public transport authorities, city authorities, can use these different approaches or tools in various circumstances and combine them basically to come up with the regulation that they would need to meet their goals in their cities. So an example of that could be the Memorandum of Understanding. This is something that is being used, and this also gives a bit more flexibility for new service providers to operate in a city. That could be combined with how data, or a good way of an optimal way of using data and sharing data sustainably between the different parties. This could be used in the selection of a private party by the authority for the enforcement or compliance about how they are implementing how they're operating their new mobility solution, and also to adjust and to fine-tune the regulation which they have in place. And we have these flexible and adaptive regulatory frameworks which we have looked at into the project. And so a combination, I would say, these 3 tools and approaches, this could be an interesting way for an authority, a city, to work with new mobility operators.
Mm-hmm. Great, very interesting. We'll get into more detail. So let me continue with the speakers and get more into what we've been discussing and, well, listening to in the presentation. So I continue with Ping-Jen, please.
Yeah.
The words.
So my 3 recommendations or 3 key takeaways. So the first one, I would say, so firms need to be very aware of we call the sustainable dilemma. So they try to be sustainable, but eventually they found it's difficult to be. And this dilemma is usually originated from the policy. So in GECKO, we have a summary of, I think, Yannick, please correct me if I'm wrong, more than 150 different policies, and understanding this policy in different innovation categories can make you be more sensitive about whether it's a good way to go sustainable in the short term or in a long term time frame. And the second key takeaway is the cross-industry collaboration. So especially after COVID-19, it's really difficult to just say, I only work with transport partners, transport operator partners. They first also need to be considering working with other industry partners in order to provide more customized, tailored solution to different audience. So this is also quite important. And the third key takeaway is the consistency between firm strategies and the policies. So especially now, there are many different short-term policies, but we also need to look into the long-term sustainability policies because it will shape our daily business in the long term. So in the GECKO, Yannick mentioned that we have 3 different kind of tools that you can follow to understand more about the long-term policies, and you will understand more how the fitness between your strategy and the policy will be helpful for you in the future. Yeah, so this is my 3 main key takeaway.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Meanwhile, Yannick was saying 228 regulations in the compliance map, but you will listen more about it tomorrow. So thank you, Ping-Tang, and then we go to Ignat.
Yes, thank you. I agree with the previous speakers that one of the most important for me was that there are different approaches to govern projects, mobility project. These adaptive regulatory sandboxes and so on that we studied quite a lot. It was interesting how cities or even countries adapt technologies on their own way, maybe even close cities consider projects differently. It was quite interesting how they try to implement these mobility solutions in their life. The second takeaway that there are no strict rules and guidelines for companies that offer shared mobility. For example, there are quite many routes how to achieve success, and I think that business model innovation is still quite important for them. They change, they adapt, and also cities can raise new questions, can raise new barriers for them, how they overcome these barriers. It's quite interesting, and every story is quite independent, and we cannot, in most of the cases, we cannot compare everything together. And the third takeaway, maybe it's a bit more personal. The GECKO project inspired me to use to test the e-scooter platform for the first time, and it was very interesting for me. Yes, thank you, GECKO, for this inspiration, and I recommend everybody to use shared mobility. It's quite interesting.
Thank you very much for this personal touch, Ignat. Very nice. So use more shared mobility. That's also a last takeaway for people listening. So I just want to perhaps reverse a question that we have in the chat. Alan was saying, isn't one of the big challenges that the private partners we are talking about may appear and disappear again? Have you discussed the risks for authorities that get strongly involved with providers that don't stay on board? Who wants to reply, to provide an answer to Alan?
Maybe I can start with a brief word on this, just to say that this comes to one of the key issues also between this interaction between public and private parties, is this issue of trust between the two. And sometimes we can see then there is tension between the different goals between public and private parties, in that the private parties obviously would have then a more business model focus, whereas the public party would have a more focus on the policies of the authority. And this could lead to this tension between the two. So one thing, maybe there's not necessarily a silver bullet for this, but one thing that can help this is something that has also been mentioned before here, is kind of platforms, forums to increase discussion between the two, so that at least there is a higher degree of discussion and cooperation between public and private parties, so that these type of things can be maybe anticipated or discussed and planned or foreseen in somehow.
Thank you, Yannick. So trust as a way actually to exchange information, well, or information as a way to build trust and then prevent perhaps this situation, depending, because we don't know if they, for which reason they leave, might be different reasons, right? But anybody wants to add to what Yannick was saying? Any more suggestions on this? Yes, Emmanuel.
Maybe I can say really briefly, I think it's a key question, and it's true that for authorities, the issue of looking at not just the regulation and not just the process and not just the, let's say, the discussion, but also at the market is a key challenge, and requires certainly some kind of specific, let's say, skills, and this is not an easy one, and I would fully support what Yannick said regarding the key word, which is trust. I think on both sides, and trust is also of authorities who could decide to, let's say, bring some support. They also need to ensure that the private partner with whom they feel like they want to work has some strong, bones. So that's a key question, really important question, the market side.
Yeah, and the relationship between public and private, and the role of public in relation to private. Like, is it the role of public sector to kind of shape and help the market, or not? So there are many questions in there, but let me, perhaps if nobody wants to add more on that side, I can perhaps follow on the chat. More things to come. So there is Wolfgang saying regulation is often considered as a barrier for innovation, or the implementation of innovative mobility solutions, respectively. Do you have good practice examples from GECKO project where regulation actually fostered innovation or set a framework for implementation of innovation? So regulation helping fostering innovation. Is there any examples from GECKO?
Maybe I can say a few words about it. I agree that regulation is often considered as a barrier, but in our cases, quite often there were no regulation at all for implementation of mobility innovations, and actually companies suffered because of it quite a lot. Rules could be changed quite fast. It was, in some of the cases, it was very hard to adapt, and companies had to leave the market, for example. So companies offered policymakers, for example, to organize any kind of cooperation, collaboration in order to make this regulation. So the lack of regulations, was the most important thing. So it was not a barrier, I think.
So the lack of regulation is a barrier.
The lack of regulation is a barrier. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, probably yes. I can add something. So I think it also depends on different market stage of your innovation. So if it's in the initiation stage of innovation, the strict regulation might be very difficult for firms to develop something radically new. So in this stage, a more adaptive, more flexible regulatory framework will be useful to encourage all the participants in the market to thinking outside the box. However, if we are talking about the later stage of particular innovation, we need more concrete, more strict, not fully strict, but relatively strict regulation to generate the standards in the market, which can make all the competitors or all the entrants of these companies to be more confident when they try to expand their market. And this can also reduce the uncertainties for their market expansion strategies. So it really depends on different stage of a particular innovation categories. Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting point to put there. Thank you, Pingtan. Any more comments? Meanwhile, there are more questions, so I'm going to follow. Very good. So here we have Ron. Ron says, during the past 30 years of the development of advanced transportation technology, he's talking about ITS, more and more sectors of the economy have increased their participation in transportation planning. Will this continue in the future, or will the other sector of the economy drop off? So looking into the future, so does anybody has a crystal ball or something? Who wants to reply? No crystal ball? Nobody?
Well, I think just to say a brief word about this, what we have seen, though, is indeed that various other sectors have been collaborating with transport. And this also, you could say, complicates the regulatory process with all these different various mergers of various sectors, not just transport, but others around it also, while the regulation process can sometimes be quite silo-focused and focused on just on transport or just on health or just on retail or something else like this. So one thing that we do need to help this and to mediate this is better communication and cross-sector collaboration from the authorities and regulators that are able to then facilitate, as I say, this communication word between these various sectors so that they can work together. So in that sense, if we would have that type of regulation process, this type of cross-sector cooperation between various sectors and also between various different authorities, then certainly that trend would seem to continue, I would say.
Interesting point, Yannick. Very interesting. So breaking silos as a way to actually bring in more players into the market and try to create more collaboration finally for better services, better mobility. I would summarize. So we have more comments. Actually, there's somebody picking up on what we were discussing before. So it's long. Let me just read it. My recommendation, it's Kimo talking. My recommendation is not to try and pick a winner, but provide open identical terms to any willing provider. There is real demand, someone will step up. If there isn't demand, who cares? So this is a response to question of Alan before. So about selection of private providers, I would say. Now, and it's interesting because this is providing discussion. So keep going. I'll open up the mic in a second, but let me just take a question that we have on the chat. So trust is important. We were talking about trust just a few seconds ago, but public authorities can't just trust private operators. They have obligations to ensure fair competition, proper use of public assets, safeguards against abuse. Emmanuel, I think, was talking about conditions. Flexibility needs trust, and limitation to flexibility often come from those obligations. How do we, talking about public and private actors, deal with that? So I'm thinking more into the topic of trust and flexibility and condition, perhaps. Who wants to add your own insights to this question?
I can say something, Lydia, to start with, maybe to launch the discussion. First, I'd like to say that all those new mobility services actually not only develop in let's say global north, what we call the global north, but we also see these kinds of or some equivalent types of services in other parts of the world and in other types of transport sector. I refer to this to paratransit and informal transport. And there's there are both in north and south the same type of challenges, flexibility and trust. One thing that derives, or one lesson that we could learn from some experience coming from, for instance, Latin America or certain parts of Asia or certain parts of Africa, where there has been some change in the transport sector, is that it has taken time actually to create this trust. It's not something which will come in 1 week, in 1 month. Also, the idea of transforming a system, making it more in line with some political goals, more coherent, more integrated, is also something which takes time. So how do we deal with that? I think the first ingredient is time, and probably the second ingredient again is constant discussion, constant co-construction, constant understanding on both sides. And also probably one last element I would say would probably be something like, I don't want to look too simplistic, but let's not be too much afraid of failures, right? Because sometimes there are certain conditions or certain context where actually one solution will work and in another context it will not work. So yeah, that's my take on that. And maybe if we have time, I could come back on the question of Ron that was raised earlier about transport planning.
Yes, anybody wants to add to the question? If not, perhaps Emmanuel, you can give your own view on the planning question.
Right, thanks. I think it's an interesting question. I'm not sure I fully understand exactly what transportation planning means there. For me, transportation planning really refers to a role of an authority or the public-private body, which has this kind of overall role, vision, mission of defining a vision of what transport should be and trying to make sure that everything is implemented to actually reach this vision. However, there are indeed lots of private initiatives from small types of businesses, IT businesses, but we also could think about big car manufacturers, for instance, who are now more and more thinking less about selling individual cars, but maybe more and more selling a service. So you would rent a car for some years, then you would have also the maintenance of the car, and then it could become a car sharing scheme, and then it would be it would be an electric car sharing, etc., etc. So I think we have to distinguish first transportation technologies, services, and the transport planning, and then the role of the transport planning should be about, in my view, picking up some of the maybe innovations from small or large companies and trying to organize this in line with the overall vision. That's it. That's it on that point.
Thank you. Thank you, Manuel. Then very timely, we have a last question. So last question for all from Pedro. So according to the dictionary, to combine is to join or merge to form a single unit of substance. This is the first meaning. And the second is unite for a common purpose. So we face two possible developments. Either look at urban mobility as a pure market and hope its invisible hand will somehow fix it, or foster the emergence of combined offerings. So do you think, I'm talking to you speakers, do you think this implies two distinct and incompatible regulatory paths? So talking about paths or scenario, where one is more purely market-driven, and the other one is more getting into something more integrated and combined mobility. So what's your take on this path? What have you seen in GECKO as approaches, perhaps? Are they incompatible? Have you seen these trends, or perhaps you've seen something else? What can you share with the audience?
I think there's also a very interesting follow-up in the chat there to say that they are distinct but not incompatible. So there's certainly ways to combine the two. There's various visions for the future. We can say we can have either very individualized services go along the path of individualized automated vehicles, sticking also to our private vehicles, and in this case, regulation is maybe not necessarily providing the right structure and the right framework for services, or too loose, or so to say, like that. Or we can have the right regulatory conditions with the various aspects we're talking about in our project also here, which would then allow and foster shared mobility, more green mobility, cleaner vehicles. So that's the path that we have been aiming to go for in this project, using public transport and also complementarity with shared mobility and other modes of transport. And we hope with the guidelines that we have and the recommendations we have in the project that this can become possible.
Thank you very much, Yannick. That was clear, and it was a nice closing. So if there's no, I see that there are also people chatting, which is very good for a chat. It's also for that. But there are no more questions from my side. I see the time. So Yannick, is that okay if we close it here?
Yes, I think that's very good. So thank you very much, Lydia, and thank you very much to all of our speakers for today. I would like to thank also all the participants for joining today, and also for your questions and inputs, and indeed also the nice chat that's taking place. We will continue tomorrow with the second day of this final conference, which will be starting again at the same times as today, which we had. So one session 10 a.m. Central European time, and then repeated again in the afternoon at 3 p.m. Central European time also. So thanks a lot to everyone. Thank you for joining, and have a good morning or afternoon wherever you are. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.